For them, hydropower is the cleanest power and the only way forward. So what does it mean for international river basin management? What does it mean for cooperation across borders? I think keep that in your mind. And now I'm going to call up this very distinguished panel. First is Professor Chamnian, who was the director of the Thailand Environment Institute, and now is the advisor to the Institute for Thailand, working with a lot of grassroots organizations and with more than 25 years experience on people's participation and working with the environment. Can I ask you to take a chair, sir? In the morning, in one of the green growth sessions, I mentioned that in this room that we're talking about green growth, everybody knows the value of environment. Coming to an IUCN Congress, if you don't know the value of environment and saving the climate, nature, then something is wrong. Is how do you take this knowledge to the common people, the 99.9% of the people who are actually influencing all this growth that is happening, all the things, consumerism, the need and greed issues. And that's when we felt that one important sector or a stakeholder that we need to make friends with is the media. And we have Kun Anothai, who is the head of the Thai Public Broadcasting Service with us. I think he and his organization and with partners like IUCN, WWF and others, is how do we really take the message along with the primetime soap operas that take place, and the Thai people or the Indian people watching their Bollywood movies also start understanding about some of the issues that we talk in Jeju or in Barcelona or wherever. So I think it's very good that we have with us after this, I would really like to call another stalwart who doesn't need any introduction in this room. Somebody who's spent his entire life for conservation, development. More than conservation, I think it's development, and I think he will shout at me later why I said this is, of course, our President, Ashok Khosla, because I think he understood first that if poor people cannot save the environment, first you have to see that there is food in the stomach of the poor people, and then we can talk of all the other things in the world. And some of the pioneering work he's done with his organization called Development Alternatives, and leading us for the last 4 years. And the second last person I'm going to call is Javed Jabbar, who I think is one of the best orators I've seen in my last few years, and trying to learn from him how to talk in the most diplomatic language, which is English, which is neither his nor my mother tongue. But Javed Jabbar is here actually as not only is the Vice President of IUCN, but in his role as being from the private sector, and somebody who has tried to get a soul to the private sector in the region. He's been working in Pakistan. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And last but not the least, I would like to call Minister Heidi, who is the Minister for International Development for the Government of Finland. Please, ma'am. Without any further ado, what I'm going to say is, as I told the panel, 8 or 10 minutes, it's their time. Whatever they want to speak, they can speak. Whatever they want to comment on what's happened. And as I said, you can talk from an international stratospheric level to something happening at the grassroots level of what you feel are the things that are missing or that need to happen if we have to tackle some of these challenges that we saw in the clips and some of the challenges that we are talking actually in this Congress. So I would like to begin by Professor Chamnian. You can come here or what are you? And if you stick to about 8 or 10 minutes each panelist, then I'm sure we'll have about 20-25 minutes for the question and answer session. You have to just start taking your own questions here.
Unless you prefer to go to the podium.
Well, friends, I'm Mekong River boy. Was born in Nakhon Phanom, where I used to swim, used to fish, and used to smuggle. The French braid from Thai for my mother, in Nakhon Phanom. Well, I think that this is a very true and very real that Mekong has been a forum for dialogue for thousands of years, not only yesterday or a few years ago. But the question is that whether Mekong will remain a forum for dialogue for the next century. I have a lot of doubts about it, particularly the incoming of the ASEAN. Why? I understand that so far the dialogue has remained mostly, totally, and wholly on the national level. And the dialogue has been always kept in the policies, strategies, and money, right, on the international and regional level. The dialogue has been very little promoted and encouraged in the local level, local governments. So that's why it is very important that the dialogue should be less formalized, less centralized, more pro-people, pro-local governments, local people. Right? And I think that from my own experiences, it's very true that we need not to ask any extra legal body in order to communicate, among the people and between the people across the river. Right? Because they are relatives, they are friends, they are brothers and sisters, right? They can go across and communicate, among themselves very well. What sort of things that have been communicated, in a formal way, right? They have very much cultural values, right? Common cultural and religious values. The people from Thak Khek can come to Nakhon Phanom, or the people from Suvarnakhet, right, and can come to Mukdahan in order to celebrate in Thak Phanom, right, for years and hundreds of years, already, right? And the MRC does not value this cultural heritage when they are forming any government or any development strategy. People have been communicating with them on education for so long, already for the exchange. The people communicating with them for exchange of goods and trades, right? Particularly between when TI has been working on the MDG report in Nakhon Phanom. And we have asked by our friends in Laos in order to come, in order to promote, in order to exchange, about agricultural products, like for example. These are, the values that have been there, for so long. And the people, particularly policymakers, sorry to say that also some of the donors to this, water dialogue do not have really the access, to understanding, of the religious or cultural values. That means that we try to separate water from land, right? From the habitat, from the people where they're living, their own living, right? We always try to disintegrate the water from the rest of the life of the people, right? Like for example, the lady from Cambodia who has very clearly said that. And not only she, right, from Cambodia, but all the countries, the villages, they really value, right, their cultural heritage is very well. Mekong has spirit, right? the people value the spirit of Mekong, of the river. That very few people understand the spirit of the river. Right? In land, they also have the spirit. Water, they have the spirit. Air, they have spirit. Forests, they have spirits. That's where and how the people really respect the spirit, because they consider river as friends, air as a friends, forest as a friend. And if you want to live together, don't overexploit the friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chang Yen. May I now request Javed Jabbar sir, a few words.
Thank you. So that I can see all your handsome and beautiful faces better from here. Mr. Radhananda. Thank you, Ganesh, for your generous introduction and this invitation. It's a privilege to be here with Minister Watala and Dr. Ashok Khosla, distinguished friends from the Mekong River Basin area, and yourselves. Me from South Asia, I feel like I'm part of an invasive species. And I bring the viruses of South Asia with me. You have to be very careful, keep your distance, don't get infected, and especially with both an Indian and a Pakistani in this room, the scope for cooperation, let us say, not conflict, is limitless. I'd like to remind you that we played a very small, inconsequential, not invisible role in vigorously campaigning for the Indian candidate in Barcelona. So Pakistan was supporting the election of a very distinguished Indian. So it's a privilege to be here with Mr. Khosla as our leader. Friends, I think I've been very moved by the privilege of commenting on this subject, even though I don't live here, not privileged to, but just looking at Mr. Mehta's very informative presentation. It was so enlightening to see how step by step, incrementally, even if you're dealing only with Laos or Thailand, and ignoring the elephant in the room, which Nasir Memon, my friend from Pakistan, gently pointed out, a benevolent elephant called China, even if it is not part of that process yet. How challenging it is to deal with creating a new structure, process for cooperation. Here we are dealing with one of the most fundamental elements of life, water. How much more basic can you get than water after air? Yet this is just the beginning. The construction of bilateral official agreements. So much done already, so carefully, and yet so much more. I think it also reflects the incredible political complexity of this region. As it is, it's the world's second largest, richest biodiversity region after the Amazon. But in terms of political complexity, you've got 6 countries here with a direct stake in the Mekong River, each with a very distinct political system, though their communist past in some cases may ostensibly appear to have commonalities between parts of Vietnam and China. And in terms of size also, a remarkable contrast, the world's largest population and some of the world's smallest population. So remarkable complexity, and then abutting the basin, abutting what is probably one of the world's most sensitive geopolitical hotspots, the South China Sea. And the first question that arises from whether it is a private sectoral viewpoint or a global citizen's viewpoint is, will governments have the capacity to prevent the tensions, both land-based tensions, which fortunately are not many now, but the tensions arising out of the undemarcated, unagreed maritime boundaries, which are erupting with remarkable and alarming ferocity. Ferocity may be too extreme a word, but with very alarmist tendencies, all the way from North-South Korea down to the South China Sea in this region? And will they be able to prevent the spillover affecting cooperation in the Mekong River Basin issues, which should really transcend those geopolitical land-based conflict or even maritime-based conflict? And that will be a big challenge. And I say this because the private sector, a terrible term called the private sector, words are important, they're always important, and it makes it sound very organized and coherent and institutionalized. But the private sector is very heterogeneous, it's very diverse, includes small and medium enterprises. A lot of them may have something to do with the Mekong River's health, a lot of them don't. They are ordinary large-scale national businesses, and then there is this special species called the multinational corporation, MNCs, all preparing this part of the region to contribute towards Asia Pacific, constituting almost 50% of the world's GDP over the next 20 years. So, in an area which is driven by growth, where so many hundreds of millions of people justifiably want to catch up, they want to catch up with Europe and they want to catch up with America, and here, on the other hand, is this bunch of environmentalists and people very concerned about water issues, saying, just hold on, don't gallop towards your self-destruct in the mantra of the free market. So this is going to be a great challenge for the private sector in Southeast Asia. How do we, without reining in constructive, productive growth that generates jobs, employment, livelihoods, at a time when the world has not yet come out of recession? How do we ensure that ecological values and the great spiritual heritage that my predecessor speaker referred to so movingly is preserved? So whether it is that small business or whether it is the multinational corporation, the private sector has to be heedful of this. But let us also give credit to the private sector. Where possible, many companies have demonstrated what they have now begun to call corporate social responsibility, which in the past used to be really charity-oriented philanthropy, giving to the handicapped, the blind, and so on, disabled people, but has expanded in the last 2 decades to include what can broadly be termed green issues. And corporate social responsibility and as a conceptual and programmatic instrument affords a very useful process by which the private sector can be encouraged to look at the Mekong River issues, not as something political, not as something alien to the private sector, because the private sector loves to play holy cow for itself, that is. It doesn't want to have anything to do with politics. Politics it leaves to angels like myself, while they get on with the business of selling you things which you don't really need. But the private sector needs to realize that this is a collective, shared responsibility. Not the responsibility of states and governments alone, which are often demonized for being too partisan and too political. Well, how much more political can you get than water? In my humble opinion, water is the most important political issue. And there's no need to treat it as a non-political issue. This whole distortion of how we use language, and that in turn distorts our ability to perceive the importance of these issues. The private sector needs to be careful in how it engages in this process. So it is part of this mess and this beauty. And it is not there just to make money, because making money, as we know, is not enough. And I think they are good citizens enough to remind themselves of that. Can they learn from other regions of the world? Well, they can. Private sector can look at South Asia. Here we have 2 countries, Pakistan and India. And we have on the one hand a water treaty called the Indus Waters Treaty, which was signed in 1960, which has survived 2 full-scale wars and a half war at Kargil, 2.5 wars. It has survived 52 years of the unresolved tensions generated by Kashmir and other issues like Siachen, Sir Creek. So a remarkable example of that model, accompanied now by a new momentum in trade between two very adversarially, traditionally adversarial countries. So in Southeast Asia, fortunately, hopefully, that kind of protracted unresolved conflict will not be replicated here. But I think the leadership of trade and industry in Southeast Asia would do well to look at what is happening in South Asia today. A very major shift is taking place, even while other issues remain unresolved. So one would urge this exchange of information and dialogue not only within the region, but across regions. And lastly, perhaps I'd like to recommend for the private sector's consideration in this part of the world, the need to expand the concept of their philanthropy, to be able to energize track 2 dialogues, whether it is water dialogue or other sectoral dialogues, and especially with those 2 countries